she is. Take it away, Sue. Wait. We can't hear you.
Okay.
Yes. Hi, Sue.
PaperWorks is very honored to have as a member Suzanne Moore. Suzanne was born to a family of gifted inventor engineers raised in post-Sputnik Middle America with aptitudes in math and science. And she was channeled into those fields at an early age. And then she embraced her artist side at 20-something and received a BFA in printmaking and drawing from the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. And she's going to talk about her work, but I wanted to mention one thing, which was how I know of Suzanne Moore. If you were a member maybe 4 years ago, you might remember I brought a volume of the St. John's Bible to a meeting. And of course, this wasn't the original, which is hand calligraphed on vellum, hand illuminated in a climate controlled library at the monastery that commissioned it. But this is actually the first such work since Gutenberg, basically. But what I brought to the meeting was a beautiful replica lithographed on cotton paper from the original pages. And so that's all I'm going to say. She's going to tell us about her formidable body of work.
Great. Thank you, Sue. And let me just replace the spotlight with Suzanne. Welcome, Suzanne.
Thanks.
We're looking forward to hearing all about you and your work.
I'm glad to be here, and thank you, Sue, for that. There is a little bit about the Bible because it was such a big, it was such a tremendous honor for me to work on it. I'm so delighted to be here, and I'll tell you a little bit about moving from the Northwest to Tucson in my talk, but I want to thank Michelle and Sue for working on organizing a workshop that we decided to postpone to keep everybody safe. I'm really disappointed that I don't get to meet you all, but hopefully we can do that sometime. And it was a workshop that I created specifically for your members because it's a little different, you know, it's a little more diverse group than I often teach for. So I'll look forward to meeting some of you in person at other events in the meantime. So thank you for introducing me to PaperWorks. Thanks to Terry and to Bobby for getting everything in line for today. And I did want to mention that if you have a brightness adjustment on your device, just make sure it's not, you know, turned down really low, because of course, you know, imagery is all about light and color. So I recently discovered that on my own computer, and I thought, wow, it looks really different when you change the light setting. So what I'm showing you, I've been making books for about 40 years professionally, and as has my husband. He was a professional bookbinder before I met him in California, and I'll tell you a little bit about him and show you a glimpse of something that we worked on together. And I've made about 60 one-of-a-kind books, most of which that kind of book is what you'll see. And then a whole series of edition works that I've worked on. So I've done about 1,600 pages, I estimate, of original work on paper that's not reproduced. So image making, lettering, and it can involve painting, printmaking. I need to start over, don't I? Is that right, Bobby?
Hold on. Yeah, it was just the last sentence that was muted. So you're fine.
Isn't
just
that...
yeah.
Okay, good. So and then I've done edition books and editions of as many as 53 quite complex books, and a smaller edition of 26, and then worked and collaborated with other people on their books that are combinations of different techniques. So I was trained as a printmaker and didn't get to have a press of my own until the one you see right behind me. Just under 40 years after I got a degree. And in the meantime, I lived on Vashon Island near Seattle and joined a print collective that had 10 members that shared all the expenses and a large press that one of the members had. So I got to go back to printmaking when I moved to Vashon in 2005. So I have a lot of images to show you. Keep in mind that my books are usually quite large. The smallest ones are probably 10 or 11 inches high, and they go up to 18 inches high and range from about 30 pages to 122 pages. So what you're seeing when I'm showing you kind of selections for in this talk are not the whole book. I think there's only one book that I show you the book from the beginning to the end. So just keep in mind that they're kind of selections from larger works. And I'll try to remember to mention key information that might help you imagine what they look like in person. And of course, the best thing would be is if we could be together and you could see and touch and page through and handle the books and experience them the way that they are intended to be. Okay, so I'm going to share screen. Does that look good, Bobby?
Oh, wait. Yes, it looks fine. Thank you.
As you did, I see a big tower of images on the right that's covering up part of the image, but do you all see that?
I am just seeing you on the side, and
okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay. Then I won't be concerned about it.
Right.
Okay, so I expanded and changed a talk that I gave with the same title to include some additional information for you all. And I know that you have different interests. So there's some things about painted papers, printmaking, a variety of things that you might find interesting. So there's a lot of images, and I'm gonna, because it's a book, I'm gonna go through some of them fairly quickly. But are we still agreed, Bobby, that people can unmute themselves if they want to ask a question during the slide?
Yes, if you want, we'll save time at the end for questions and discussion. But if there's something on an image that Suzanne's talking about and you'd like to unmute yourself, Suzanne, you're good with that, right, Suzanne?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think it's easier than trying to go back through,
right,
find it again.
Right.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Okay.
Okay. So as Sue said, I was born in Iowa and grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And my three brothers are all quite gifted engineers and inventors. And my dad had a concrete step business. And this is a picture in front of a house that we had when we moved to Milwaukee, and he had that business. As she said, I had a lot of aptitude in math and science, so I really wasn't allowed to take any art courses until the very end of my senior year. This is the view from our old house on Vashon, and I'm a devoted gardener and soil builder, and there was one plant on this property when I came there, and little by little I kind of built plantings completely surrounding the property. And in the far distance on the left you can see Mount Rainier, a tiny little bit of Mount Rainier. it's a completely different climate there and very amenable to, things like peonies, which I collected, and this wonderful rose that when I figured out how to keep the deer out of the garden, instead of being 3 feet tall, it was about 7 feet tall.
Oh my gosh.
And this was the Vashon studio, and our wonderful assistant, Gabby Cooksey, that worked with us for 6 years. She came to us having graduated from the North Bennett Street School and with a lot of talent and experience. And this is what the backdrop of the Vashon studio looked like. So this was my work table, and she's working on the page that you see on the right. She worked on addition things, made boxes, did some very complex work, making a inlaid jewelry box for a book about Scheherazade that I did. And she did a tremendous amount of work in our in Don's studio as well. And then we moved to Tucson, which is obviously a completely different climate. I have so much to learn. This is this wonderful installation at the airport. And the architecture and aesthetics of each part of the country are so distinct. Arco Sante on the left and some Tucson glimpses on the right, which we really enjoy. And then, of course, the plant life is magical, and the kinds of rocks, that appear in this part of the country. And, of course, in Tubac, we discovered this shop with a very a different kind of plant life, that, an entire shop of metal cacti and different kinds of agave. It was such a trip. So this is what my work table looks like in a room off the kitchen dining room of our house that was probably a porch and was enclosed. So it looks to the north. And it's a long, long, skinny room, as a lot of times those rooms are, and has these Palladian windows. And you can see that there are various kind of islands that I adore long, skinny spaces to work in. And the idea of having islands that you can do and place different things on. And my work table, you can see there's a current book and my palette in the foreground. I'm inspired by so many different kinds of things. Quite often, it's the materials, and of course, I'm not a binder except when I bind my own books in paper, which I don't do that much anymore. But on the right are just kind of trailings and offcuts and bits from leather and different kinds of materials from my husband's studio, Don Glaister. He's a design binder, and you might remember from the Vashon studio my obsession with the letter A. So I probably have 50 different letter A's and a lot of O's and some Q's. Probably more than book artists, the work of painters really inspires me, and particularly painters and visual artists who also write really well about art making and seeing and aspects of art making that have to do with spirituality. And Kandinsky and Mark Rothko are two of my idol painters. I just found out that I share a birthday with Kandinsky, and on my 60th birthday, some friends took me to a show at the Guggenheim that is a once every 10-year show of Kandinsky's work. So the way that he uses color and layers color and the aspect of his work that is connected to spirituality is a huge inspiration for me. I'm also devoted to the things that line and black ink on paper can create. and there's a saying in the lettering world that the line is, and writing is the scribe's cardiogram. And it's related to that idea that in Zen practice, the goal is to make one single circular brush mark, which is called an enso. And the whole trace of the hand and the heart on the page is something that fascinates me, and I strive for it and I teach about it. So the just straight black and graduated gray is really magical. Most of my work has some version of gold in it, which you see on the right. And this is a page that has a combination of yellow gold, moon gold, or champagne, and probably palladium. And you're seeing the reflections of the different kinds of gold as the light hits it here. So, this gold disappears, it turns white, or you can see it as the color that it actually is. So it has that magical quality that's particularly wonderful when you turn the pages.
Could I ask you quickly, Suzanne, going back to that, can I ask you to repeat that lovely quote that you did? There, you said that there's a line in writing.
Oh, the line or writing is the scribe's cardiogram.
What is a cardiogram?
Yeah. Oh, it's the printed out or light line that you see on a monitor from your heartbeat.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And Robert Henri talked about art being the trace of life. And when you are making marks, whether they're painted marks or written marks or abstract marks, it is the trace of you and your hand and your body at that particular moment. And that is really a fascinating thing to me. And how do we come to the work with the most authentic way of being and just focus on that one piece of paper at a time. And although my printmaking department had a mantra that went, if you can't do it in black and white, don't do it at all, which is pretty conservative in 1970, but that's what it was. I also did a lot of etching, and I also did a lot of silk screen printing and embossing. And anybody that knows anything about my work knows how color is key to it. When I'm asked to be part of shows that are going to be, or an article where my work is only going to be shown in black and white, it's I have to choose very carefully what I'm going to include. So my palettes of gouache on the left and pencils on the right, printmaking inks, I use the entire spectrum, but I do it selectively so that I usually choose 2 key colors in addition to black and white for each project. And then I just draw in enough to make the piece really sing. And you'll see examples of that in a while. This is an example of what's called a variant edition book. So there is letterpress printing, monoprint, and original work in it, and a tremendous amount of handwork. So the print on the right is an example of gouache that has been painted into white spaces that are left in a monoprint technique. So there's a manuscript book, which manuscript, handwritten, means a one-of-a-kind book. There are edition works where everything is printed. And then our dealer came up with this description that a lot of people use for our work, which is variant edition. And that means that there's handwork that goes into each book that makes each book a little bit different. I'm part of Book Paper Thread, with which there are 4 artist makers that have different interests and skills in the book and paper world. And after they had a free conference that included 2,000 viewers, I approached them about teaching with them. And so there's no real administration. We administrate all our own things, but I teach with Karen Hardy, Andrew Hewitt, and Linda Marshall. I've taught all over the world. I've taught on almost every continent except South America and Antarctica. But my favorite teaching space on the planet is this place in Telluride, Colorado, which we're much closer to now. My husband is the fine binding director. There's a fine binding program there, as well as other binding offerings at the American Academy of Bookbinding. And I have been fortunate to teach in this beautiful space that's so well equipped. And the school has people come from all over the world to study bookbinding and book related things, from the very beginning, all the different kinds of ways that you can make very simple books to the most sophisticated bindings. And they sponsor exhibitions. They have a program, a certificate program that one of our friends here in Tucson is part of. And it's just an extraordinary place. And both the website for Book Paper Thread and for the American Academy of Bookbinding shows you their offerings. These are a couple of the pages from student work and samples of gilding. So I've taught multiple classes and printmaking at the AHA School in Telluride. And so now I wanted to kind of tell you a story of how some of my work and the whole focus of my work is different than other people who've studied calligraphy, because it has more to do with the fact that I think of letters as things, as the subject of painting and drawing. And obviously you've seen I collect letters, that are things. And I have images of dancers that make letters. So I think of them as almost a small version of architecture. So that is kind of the elevator description of what particular interest I have with lettering. So when I was still a French major, because I didn't go into math and science in college, but I was a French major, and I found this section of the university library that had reproductions of manuscripts. And this is a really stunning graphic Arabic manuscript where the writing goes right across the fold in the codex book. And then you have images where you have books where there's image and writing combined, where the image becomes the letter form. So, there are human and animal and plant forms to make up each of these Gothic letters. And then fast forward to the turn of the last century, and Irene Wellington is a British calligrapher that is part of the kind of calligraphic and painter ancestry of a lot of the great English calligraphers. And she she's part of Donald Jackson's history and connection to the lettering world. And her combination of image and lettering is just so delightful. This is a really, really fine painting on animal vellum. And I don't know if it was sheep or calf. So my earliest work was inspired by Irene's work, and you can see the connection. It's a fairly traditional book design. And this was from a book called Garden of the Mind's Eye. This is one of the smallest books that I'll show you. It's about 9 inches tall, and it's done on English vintage papers with gouache, and the lettering and painting is all done in gouache. And somewhere along the line, I came across this passage from the 18th century. Whence did the wondrous mystic art arise of painting speech and speaking to the eyes? That we, by tracing magic lines, are taught how to embody and to color thought. So that whole idea of representing words and thoughts in color and line is, I think, encapsulated in this really beautiful passage. And it certainly has, I've used it as the kind of lead in, almost like an incantation to a series of books on the Cherokee writing system. And this is the fourth, an image from the fourth in a series of Cherokee books that had somewhere between 50 and 70 pages in each book. And they spanned about 10 years' time. And each one had some things that were alike in the book and some things that varied. And these paintings, they look like stencils, but what they are is drawings of the typographic forms of the 86 characters of the Cherokee alphabet, which was a writing system invented by Sequoyah, who was a silversmith. And he knew that he was illiterate. He didn't read or write any other language, but he knew that the white man had talking leaves. And so over a period of 17 years, he invented a complete writing system that is still in practice. And historically, alphabets are not invented in a lifetime. They evolve over centuries, and his story was extraordinary. So I wanted to tell it in multiple books over a period of time. And then an Italian collector commissioned the largest book of that series, which was 122 pages. So this is paste paper background, and then the paintings of the backgrounds of the letters, letting the color show through, are kind of a metallic and gouache, and the green is handwritten in gouache. This is also all writing, not legible, with a foreign language, kind of in that horizon set of letters that goes left to right, and it juxtaposes a poem that I wrote to music going the other direction. All the first much freer kind of horizontal writing was done first, and then the page was painted, and then all the other letter forms were put on, including the gold. So this is a fairly early piece, and it works with languages that I don't read and abstracting poetry. So as I said, color is huge. And for me, I do use acrylic to paint big things, but for detail work and for lettering, it's always gouache. And there's somewhere between 60 and 120 colors mixed up at one time. And I wanted to just, because it was such an extraordinary opportunity in my life, to talk very briefly about the St. John's Bible. There are 3 projects that I talk about in this book that there's each one of them has a complete slideshow just talking about that. And the reason that I learned about Tucson was because I came and gave a talk at St. Philip's, where that Sue is connected with. So that's how she knew about me. So Donald Jackson is a scribe in Wales, and who's been working for a long time. And he decided that and proposed the idea of making a one-of-a-kind manuscript contemporary Bible on vellum. And you can see, relative to his body, that the book is 3 feet tall and the open page is 4 feet wide. So you have to work on it vertically. And he invited me to help him with many other gifted people create a Bible that was destined for the altar that you see on the right at St. John's Abbey in Collegeville, Minnesota, an extraordinary Marcel Breuer piece of architecture, and the book was made for it. And when I asked Donald, why me, because there were so many people that wanted to be part of the project, he had seen this book 20 years earlier, and he said, I remember the way that book felt. And I thought, oh man, he's got me. And because, you know, that's a huge thing to create a Bible, to create something that you have no idea who the readership would be, and they were going to make reproductions. So how do you not feel that that is a huge shadow? And he asked me when he looked at it, whatever possessed you, Suzanne, to use pistachio on scarlet. And this might be a palette that's used a little more now, but this was 1988. So it was quite a while ago. The team at the Abbey had a role that helped guide us toward information to inform our various illuminations. And on the right, you see the Wales team, including many of the scribes, and just one little mock-up for how the pages evolve as you turn them in each one of the books for the Bible. So this is an image from Donald's very first image that he made. And I do want you to note that this is the family tree of Jesus, and to meld the history of the Hebraic tradition with Christianity and also add this Hindu medallion, he made the family tree of Jesus out of a menorah. Another one of the illuminators that worked on all the volumes, with the exception of Psalms, was my friend and teacher from the 1981-82, Thomas Ingmeyer. And this is he used lettering as the key to all of his work. This is Beatitudes, and all of the fine lettering on the left is raised gold leaf. And when I got my first pages, this illumination was on the back. And I had to stretch this piece of vellum with his gold and painting down on the work table. So that was pretty daunting, but we never did that again. We decided that wasn't a good plan. So just some of the 13 pieces that I worked on. I'll show you this one. It's from Sirach, and the working title is called In Praise of Wisdom, with the idea that the feminine is the source of wisdom. So I used early goddess symbols to weave into the idea, and kind of fruits from the Bible, and wheat as, you know, the bread being something that sustains us humans. And I got the pages with first in a paper copy. So they would roll up these big, we got this 3.5 foot tall roll that had a rolled up piece of paper that showed where all of the lettering was going to be. And each of the pieces that I worked on, all the lettering was finished on both sides of the large vellum cow skin that they used. And we would make, on this paper copy, first, we would make a sketch as close as possible to the final, and then send it for approval and talk a little bit about our ideas behind it, and then do the final. We would get approval and then do the final. And one of the most wonderful assignments was this one that is from Kings, and it's also has to do with a female prophet one of the guides that they gave us is they wanted us to represent the stories of men and women more equally in the Bible. They wanted us to address the problems of social injustice and connect Christianity with the Hebraic tradition. And Donald's, final question was, or challenge was, make images that no one has ever seen before. So that was extraordinary. And I got this assignment for Kings, which the working title was The Power of the Book, because the female prophetess told the young king, when he was asking about what his future would be, she said, "You will find it in the book." So here you see a stylized quill. You can imagine that, and kind of quill-like feathers. This is a background of the universe, but also the top of a Torah scroll. And these are the Huldah gates, which are the only piece of architecture on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem that is dedicated to a woman. And she was a prophetess, Huldah. And when I did research, I found out this story and talked to the committee about it, and they said that was a fine approach. So what I did was I researched as many languages as I could find, sacred texts from various traditions, because they wanted us to make this an ecumenical book. And so each of these things that each of these lines of lettering that you can see kind of layered and floating over each other is a different letter style from a different historical sacred book. And when I was painting this, and it was taking me so long, my husband said, "What is taking so long?" And he looked at the brush I was using, and he said, "Well, I know what the problem is. You're using the world's smallest brush to paint 1 square foot of painting." So here you can see what's called show through. So vellum allows colors to be seen through the back of the skin. And we did some painting out to make sure that we'd back our paintings up with white sometimes, but they liked that idea of the show through, and it gives this page a little more life, and makes it part of a continuum. And then this is the cosmos painting, and also a kind of side and top view of the Torah scroll. I couldn't have asked for a more extraordinary person to work with. Donald was one of those larger than life figures that really scared me every time I was in the same room with him. So I never really spoke to him very much before, I had become a professional. And he said to me when he was thinking about the book at a conference, he said, when he was just thinking about this book, he said, "You've made more books than anyone I know, and I wonder what you think about this project." And I said, "Well, the scale of it is mind-boggling." It was 1,156 pages written and illuminated on vellum. And because it was such a big book, it was broken into multiple volumes. And I said, "Donald, every book I make changes me in some long-lasting way." I said, "The scale of this is so huge and so far-reaching. This will change everything about your life." And looking back on it and becoming a collaborator with him, at the time, he was thinking of doing it himself. Looking back on it, I think that was a pretty accurate suggestion of what might happen. And for the first 5 years of the project, I had a full-time job working at American Greetings. So I worked on the Bible evenings and weekends. And some of the people in the group of makers and personal assistants and computer wizard are in this gathering, picture of this gathering that we had to celebrate the ending of the project. So there are people from multiple continents here, and many of us had never met before we got to celebrate. So my work, once I left Cleveland and my job as an art director, had to do with things that I was returning to. And this book, you might remember images from the workshop because that was scheduled, because the idea of the universal symbols as being kind of key to every culture is the basis of this book and Emerson's passage about these transcendental ideas. So this is a book that I painted just a single page, and it's on a vintage handmade paper, and the final book ends up being about 10 inches tall. So it's probably a 20 by 23 inch page. And then the pages are cut, torn, and folded into folios, interleaved with additional beautiful, beautiful vintage English paper that has a very, very vellum-like look, but it's much thinner. And looking at the left-hand page and thinking of a blank right-hand page, I had to create a mark of gilding medium that resonated with the left-hand page. So the edition book of Musings that you saw a page of earlier, this is a diagram. I wasn't going to show you a diagram for a more complex book because it's just kind of visually mind-boggling. So this one you can see these are folded folios that point toward the spine. And it's a little diagram that I give to collectors to show them, how the book is assembled, because it's basically a pamphlet book made with 2 sections and a paper wrapper, but there are some things that are included and tipped in later. So this is what a diagram looks like. And because I often don't remember if I've changed a traditional way of binding very much, I always make diagrams after the book is done. So it's rare that my books would be bound in a pamphlet. Most of them are bound more like a codex. This is Every Breath is a selection of poems from Gregory Orr's book concerning the book that is the body of the beloved. And it's an extraordinary book about grief and passion and kind of longing for the answer. And this one, I'll show you the entire book. And it's gesso and charcoal and paste paper with gouache and gold. So these very charcoal looking drawings are on wet paper that has methylcellulose in it, but they retain their granular quality. Body of the beloved, body of the world, the eyes can't cease their feasting. Book of the body of the beloved, inexhaustible. Not just the book, but our hunger for it. So the translucent papers I varnish with a golden product, and then I can letter on them with fine metal tools. And they allow the pages behind them to be seen. So you get to see the words and the image simultaneously, even though the writing is on different papers. I often work in a series, and this is another Emerson book that you'll just get a glimpse of. This is a much bigger book. It's about 13 inches high and about 40 pages, and it cross-references statistics about the first Iraq War. I used to work late at night, and a lot of times the battlefield was just filling up at the time that I was working very late and into the wee hours in the morning. So this cross-references Emerson's amazing text about how we're all one with statistics about the war. And it's gesso and ink and gouache. And then collage to make these really intense kind of spear things on the left that is sewn on. Not too far from where I'm sitting is Don's studio. Because of COVID, we decided not to hire anybody to convert the garage. So we converted the garage for good or not so good. We know how to do that. So this is a 2-car garage that we insulated and put a ceiling in and had lighting done. And our friend Camille, who is a Tucsonian on the left, looks quite happy here. And I actually took this morning when she arrived to work with Don in the studio. And in the foreground, you see pages from a book, an edition book that he's working on, and Camille is helping him with. It's a Ralph Waldo Emerson book, and all the pages are created on wood veneer. So he has also had a career as a fine binder, and when we lived in Cleveland and I had a full-time job, he started making edition books. So we live a life of bookmaking, and it's a booky household, and we do have some mantras that we repeat from time to time, and one is and ain't, don't mix them up. One that I love and Camille reminded me of is Karita Kent has a set of studio rules, and one of them is just keep working. It's kind of like Nemo, just keep swimming, just keep swimming. And then Chuck Close's, people ask us, how often do you work? And we say every day. And they say, no, in your studio. And we say every day. And there's this wonderful thing that Chuck Close said, if you go to the studio, something is bound to happen. And you can extrapolate, the opposite. So I wanted to mention Don's website and put it in print here, and Camille uses Instagram to show people about her work. So you can see more of their work. This is a binding. Occasionally, Don and I work on things together. People imagine that since we live together, we work together all the time. Occasionally, we get a commission to either do an entire book, which you'll see a little later, or he was commissioned by a wonderful San Francisco collector to bind one of my 0 books. This is a book that we got commissioned from that same collector to create a book for him of Bob Dylan's song lyrics. And when I said to him, he proposed it, and I said to him, well, you'll never get the rights to Bob Dylan's song lyrics. And he said, well, you let me solve that. What we did not know is that for a couple of decades before that, he had been a collector of original Bob Dylan materials. And when he approached the Bob Dylan business people about compensating them for the rights to make this book, this one-of-a-kind book, Dylan said, I want the same book that you're getting as payment. So instead of making one book for our collector, we had to make 2 books, and they all had to be original. We couldn't use any print techniques where plates were being made. That was one of the criteria that Dylan laid out. But one of the books in payment went to Bob Dylan. And I don't know if you've ever made work for another artist, but it's pretty overwhelming if you think about it too much. So these are pages from that Bob Dylan pair of 2 books that were all made with original monoprints, and all the lettering was done by hand. This is a monoprint for Blowing in the Wind, which is all about counting how many times. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's the digital, negative, positive of a ticker tape. There's multiples of different kinds of mostly circles in this book. How many times, how many times, how many times. And this is what it looks like with interleaved Kozo paper with the song lyrics on it. This is a really big book. It's 19 inches tall and I believe 13 inches across. Mr. Tambourine Man. And monoprint was the only way to get a really diverse array of images and include 10 different distinct ideas in a single book. I say you don't need more than 2 ideas in a book. Well, I had to represent 10 very distinct ideas that reflected the huge array of Dylan's poetic work. And I decided, this was long before the Nobel Prize, I decided it's just too crazy to try to think of what the song meant to us. And we kept hearing stories about what this song or that song meant to people. And so I thought, I'm just going to look at it as poetry. I've got it printed on the page. I'm writing it by hand. And so I'm just going to think of it as poetry. And I hadn't been a huge Bob Dylan fan. I mean, kind of, but he was much more important to my husband. And my respect and awe of Bob Dylan, and really reading and writing what he wrote, even this much of what he wrote was life-changing. It was really, really amazing. This is a love song to his wife, Sarah. And it's a tender, tender song that I never remembered about. It's describing the 4 of them, his 2 children, and he and Sarah on the beach. And there's this almost plaintive refrain, "Don't ever leave me, don't ever go." It's quite amazing. So it's much more colorful. There's 2 folios that make up the centerfold of the book. And remember, this is 18.5 inches high. So when you are reading it, the image almost wraps around you. And this is, I experimented with this page first because it was the most powerful page, and its hard rains are going to fall. And it became the physical center of the book and is certainly pivotal in Dylan's work. So this is a close-up of a combination of black monoprint and acrylic paint that kind of stains it. And then in the very top, going back in with gouache and shading it so that you get this tremendous dimension. Because if you're not familiar with the song, he's talking about all the horrific things that he sees. This is one of the Christian-inspired pieces in the book. This one is another song I did not know is The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll, and it describes the beating and death of a kitchen maid by a Maryland gentleman who was tried and released. And it's a palette, and everything about each page is determined by the content I'm trying to get across. And the techniques I choose are chosen specifically for the effect that they'll have. So lots of layers. And
Well, if she finishes in time, if not, I've got to quit it anyway.
yeah, there's one more book, I think. So this is Every Grain of Sand, and it's one of the Christian the pieces that he wrote when he was exploring Christianity, and he got a lot of criticism for that. And when I read it, I thought, oh, anyone who is suffering from a crisis of faith, doesn't need to be doing it publicly. But of course, Dylan's work made it public. And so this has kind of the feeling of a Gothic arch of a church, and the steps that may be, descending or rising. And Sheryl Crow sang this song at Johnny Cash's funeral. And Roseanne Cash came up to her afterwards and said, you may not have known, but Every Grain of Sand was my father's favorite song. And Cash and Johnny Cash is a real hero of mine also. And he had a relationship with Bob Dylan early on. And of course, the last one is Restless Farewell. And the last line of the book is, and I don't give a damn, which kind of, tells you a lot about Bob Dylan. And this is my husband's binding for it. So you can see glimpses of the Gothic arch on the right. There's an aluminum panel on the left that kind of comes out of the lower corner that has automatic writing on it that my husband did. There's leather, metal, suede. There's some screen in here, and painted mylar and wood veneer. And so he also is portraying the complexity of what the book holds. The ticker tape was something that was used all through the book. And little bit of ticker tape airbrush you can see here, and tooling that is a real common aspect of my husband's work. It's the scrolly colored and writing that you see kind of behind things on the right. And the automatic writing. So he's brought the idea of the words to the cover on aluminum. And then the very last one is a briefer book, but also monoprints. And it's a book about the 7 planets that I was commissioned to do. And this is also a very tall book, a tall and slender book. And it's inspired by the Gustav Holst Planet Suite. And intended to have very little text. Every other page is just an image of the planet in monoprint and painting. And then again, there's a colored Japanese paper that is interleaved that has a very brief text, which is a very unusual situation for me. So a different challenge. And because my oldest brother worked on the arm that held the camera for Voyager, and he had passed away just before this happened, this commission happened, my engagement with the whole idea of the planets and conveying something that is unseen, but powerful and help. And then the very last one is really a process thing. So I know I'm really, but I wanted to show you one thing that I'd done here in Cleveland, and it's experiments for a book that you'll see. So the palette in those two was dramatically different, trials. Some writing experiments that I ended up not using. And this is about 15 inches tall, using different polymer mediums as resists, and then painting and doing ink over them. And it's for Wild Nights. And it's an Emily Dickinson poem. Wild nights, wild nights. Were I with thee, wild nights should be our luxury. Feudal, the winds, to a hardened port, done with the compass, done with the chart. Rowing in Eden, ah, the sea.
Recording in progress.
Might I moor tonight in thee? So it's a love poem, a poem about passion. And this is what the various panels of an accordion book look like. This is what it looks like outstretched. So it's about 7 feet wide. And it's in a traveling exhibition for the Guild of Bookworkers. I couldn't even take a picture of the whole thing in one shot. And then this is another version of it from some of the papers that I made for the first one that is in a show in Telluride. So a very different looking piece with the same text, which I often do more than one. So thank you very much for coming. I'm going to keep working with line and color and words. And remember that thing Chuck Close said, if you go to the studio, something is bound to happen. Thank you.
Clap. Oh my gosh, Suzanne, that is wonderful. Let's stop you. You want to stop sharing screen so we can
Sure.
see your full face? There you are. Oh my gosh, your work is amazing, and your husband's amazing, amazing. Everybody's blown away by it. Your talk. What great presentation. I'm going to open it up to people. If you have any questions now or comments, you may unmute yourself and ask Suzanne, this wonderful talent that's here in Tucson by us. Please unmute yourself and ask something.
Suzanne, I'm wondering, did you ever get any feedback from Bob Dylan about the book you created?
Good question. Yeah, we've asked that, and the collector is on the board that is building a Bob Dylan museum, and his interactions with Dylan have been really through other people. You know, Dylan is very protective of his privacy and his business affairs, because early on he really got burned, like a lot of musicians, you know, through history until more recently. And so we didn't expect to hear anything. My question is, did he ever see it? You know, I would love to know if he ever saw it, because this collector that we were creating the book for has 26 of my husband's bindings, more than anybody in the world, and on extraordinary books. And so to make a book for him was one challenge. And I didn't know him very well before we did this. But as I started to think about it and make the images, I really started to think about Bob Dylan. And I thought, I have no idea what he will think about this, but I sure would like to know. You know, I would love to know, but no.
Hi, Suzanne. This is Carroll Morgan, and your presentation was so inspiring. I was very, very saddened to have our time together, delayed or really canceled because of what's going on with COVID, and respect that decision. However, I would love to know of your teaching opportunities that we might take advantage of.
Mm-hmm. I designed the class specifically for PaperWorks because in conversation with Michelle and Sue, you know, it wasn't clear that a workshop I already had would fit the group perfectly. So I, I really designed it for you all. So I hope there's
Thank you.
opportunity in the future. And when I talked to Chip Schilling, our friend who's the director at AAB and Telluride, he said, well, I want you to teach a design class here where people can make pages. And I said, well, I just, worked on this workshop for PaperWorks. And he said, well, send me the description. And we talked about it. And he just looked at me and he said, I want that workshop. So, and they're sponsoring it for 5 days next fall. And other than that, I don't have any live teaching scheduled because, so many places you're not allowed to be there live at all. So many book places. And if you are, you have to be in a mask. And I taught one class in a mask in Telluride at 8,600 feet. You can imagine, because no one is allowed in that building, anywhere in the building without a mask. And you have to check your temperature when you come in, and teaching with a mask is not a great option. And I don't teach from the front of the room. I'm right with people, so that ability to freely be close to people and be in a classroom with 14 people is something I will look forward to. But right now, I don't think it's wise. So, but
Suzanne?
soon, it sounds like soon.
Suzanne, this is Bobby. You're also teaching some classes via Zoom, right? Through some organizations you are teaching, or
through Book Paper Thread. So Book Paper Thread is primarily where I'm teaching. And I have a class that starts on Monday about painting with gouache. And that's a recorded class with some live office hours. We're preparing for a biennial book fair in the Bay Area, which will be in mid-April, called Codex. And people come from all over the world as makers and collectors of books. And it's a tremendous opportunity to show and find homes for our work. So I'm not doing much teaching until May again.
okay.
And there'll be classes. If you sign up for the newsletter at Book Paper Thread, they will send you notices when new workshops come up. I don't have a mailing list myself because I've never, groups hire me to teach and they fill up the workshops immediately. So I've never had to have a mailing list or do that kind of logistical stuff myself.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yes, it'd be great to learn from you. Any other questions, comments from people?
I just, your all of your work we're all just totally blown away. But I was trying to look at your Bob Dylan book. There's a lot to look at, but I noticed how you did the titles.
Mm-hmm.
You integrated the titles
Mm-hmm.
in different ways on the pages,
Mm-hmm.
and I just admire your work so much. And we could spend literally 30 minutes just looking at one page you've done.
Yeah, I have a whole talk. I didn't even really mention the Zero book. I have an entire talk that's all about this one series of books about the digit zero. And that was 2 manuscript books. And then I made an edition, and it spanned about 7 years altogether. I was working on other things, but that whole Zero project and all the aspects of what nothing means, from spiritual to mathematical to outer space and infinity. It's a whole story, and the Bible, I give a Bible presentation, and So those bigger projects span a lot of years. And I'm working on a book about the letter Q right now that I started. I've done a series of manuscript books, but we're with a wonderful printer in Bisbee. We're making a small edition, and I started working on that book when we lived in Alabama, and my husband was teaching in the book arts master's program. He was a binding professor, and I started this book in the year 2000. What is it, 2022? And I'm finally, I just discovered all the plates and things, and I made a plate at one of the artists from the drawing studio here in Tucson on Monday for that book. So yeah, there's always a rich story behind the series. So thank you.
I just wanted to say, this is Krista. I just wanted to say that my husband and I and a couple of friends were lucky enough to be in San Diego when the St. John's Bible, the big, I guess it was the original, was exhibited. I believe it was at one of the places at Balboa Park.
Oh, yeah.
Some years ago. And it was an incredible experience, and I'll never forget it because it was put in context with all kinds of other historical events that were inspiring. It was life-changing.
Wow, that's great to hear. When that project began, and Thomas Ingmeyer was one of the other illuminators and a good friend, and my connection to Donald is through him because he studied with Donald in LA. Thomas and I were at this presentation looking at this idea that Donald had, and I said to Thomas, I said, what do you think of this project? This is years before we were working on it. And he said, it's insane. He said, I wouldn't touch this thing with a 10-foot pole. And, fast forward 3 years and we're both working on the project in different cities, Yeah. It has had ripples that are continue to be truly amazing. They go into prisons, and I was at an installation of the reproductions of the books at an Episcopal campus, kind of like a big campus like St. Philip's in Seattle. And they had a sign out on the walkway that said, contemporary Bible pages for your viewing. And so we're standing there, talking about when I was going to come and do this talk. And this runner comes in and says, I hear there's a Bible in here for me to look at. She's running by this place. And they welcomed every single person that came into that space, no matter who they were, whether they had come for the food bank or, the shelter that they had. They let every person come and look at that, the reproductions of the book and page through the book. And there's a whole idea of instead of reading the words, looking at the imagery and thinking about what you see as an individual in the imagery. And so the ripples that have gone out from it are more than I think anybody could have imagined at the beginning. Yeah, I was so lucky to work on that.
It's amazing project. I have a question. This is Bobby. A question from one of our members was asking, let's see where, Arlene is asking you, the line in the scribe's cardiogram is a great quote. Who said it? Who said that quote? Do you know? Do you remember?
It comes from a book. I'll have to look it up.
Okay, well, no hurry, but
Yeah.
it's a wonderful quote. I think people
Isn't
were
it?
writing it down, so.
And
that
it
was
doesn't
great.
mean just formal scribes. It means, a scribe is anyone who writes anything down. So
Mhm.
it's each of us who puts something on paper.
Well, and when you said the word manuscript, manual writing, I was like, duh, I should have known that. But yeah.
In book collections, there's a manuscript collection, which means anything that's just one and it's written by hand.
Mhm.
And then there's a book collection. So in libraries that collect, books, rare books or handmade books, there are two different categories. And quite often a library only collects, books that are in multiples. And Shay in Waco at Baylor has focused on creating a manuscript collection. And that's unusual. I really applaud him because I think that is a whole different category that very few curators are really focusing on. So it's great. Thank you, Shay.
Wonderful. Yeah, it was nice to chat with Shay a little bit too before the meeting. We're going to close this up pretty soon, but does anybody else have a question for Suzanne, a comment? I love how you work with your husband on the book binding. His stuff too just complements yours. It's pretty amazing. So,
and people imagine that we are more involved in each other's design process, but it really is kind of a linear thing. I finish the book and he really does whatever he wants with it. I don't, so he uses me as his color consultant, but it's his book then. And that's a wonderful way to collaborate, to just let each person do what they see and what they imagine for the piece.
well, yeah, it's pretty amazing. Well, the comments are just wonderful. Your work is incredible and amazing. Thank you for a wonderful presentation, inspiring. And somebody's asking if we will have a recording of this. Yes, we'll get it up on our YouTube channel in a few days so you can listen. There was so much, Suzanne, that you showed us in this body of work. It would be nice to see it again. And
it's why I took the time to write a lot on each slide, because sometimes that little key of information is helpful.
So, yeah, well, thank you for such an inspiring talk. And we're so happy that you're a member of PaperWorks.
Thank you.
We hope to meet you in person one of these days.
I can't wait for that.
And it would be great. And so thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Suzanne, for all you've done. And we will see you next month in March at a live meeting at St. Francis Church. So more to come on that. So anyway, I'm going to end the meeting now and we'll see you next month. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Suzanne.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.